Hey everyone, sorry for the lateness of the screencast today. Hopefully you checked Edmodo earlier today and you were able to know that the screencast can be posted around 8 o'clock. I kind of had a lot of meetings and a lot of things that I had to get done today, so that's the reason that it was posted so late. So with that being said, this is an important screencast because we missed the day's lesson today because of the college office visit. And so make sure you watch it and you watch the whole thing and you take some good notes on it. Because we're going to be moving on tomorrow in class. We're not going to be going over immigration again in class tomorrow. So the topic for today is going to be something called the new immigrants. Now we use that term in quotes because since these groups of people have come to America, there have been a lot more new different types of immigrant groups coming to the United States. And so this term specifically refers to a time period in history between 1880 and roughly 1920. And the people that came to America during that time period are going to be referred to as the new immigrants. In contrast, the group that came before them, they're going to be called the old immigrants. Now, the old immigrants, let's kind of compare and contrast them a little bit. But the old immigrants coming to America between the 1840s and the 1880s, they're going to be coming primarily from Northern and Western Europe, which means the big countries that are sending immigrants are Britain, Ireland, and Germany. In contrast, the new immigrants are coming primarily from Southern and Eastern Europe, and they're coming mostly from Italy, Poland, and Russia. Now, just to kind of compare these different groups here, the old immigrants are primarily Protestant, except for the Irish, who we know are predominantly Catholic. The new immigrants are foreign religions, mostly Catholics, and large numbers of Jews coming to America. They're also foreign in custom, in culture, and they're also foreign in just kind of lifestyle in general. Very different from the American lifestyle. Languages that don't merge well with the American languages. So, in a lot of ways, it's the first experience for America in very different types of immigrants coming to the United States. Now, where are they coming into America? Well, the old immigrants, they're going to come through, their gateway to America is a place called Castle Garden. So most Americans, I think, and most of you guys are familiar with Ellis Island. But before, for the old immigrants, their kind of place where they were medically examined and kind of their records are kept as a place called Castle Garden, which is an island off of Manhattan also. Now, the new immigrants, depending on whether you came through the East Coast or the West Coast, you would be either going through Ellis Island or a place called Angel Island. So for Ellis Island, that's the majority of where most immigrants are coming through in New York, close to Liberty Island, which you can go visit today. On the West Coast, you had primarily it's going to be Chinese and some Japanese immigrants. They're going to go through their center of immigration is going to be called Angel Island, and that's where they got checked and kind of all of the tests were done to them out there off the coast of California. Now, I want you guys to just take a look at this map, and this map is important more for the raw numbers here. So we're going to talk about the European immigrants that are coming and also some of the Asian immigrants, and just touch on a little bit of the Mexican immigration that's coming to the United States. But what you want to understand, I want you to focus on the graph at the bottom here that's giving you immigration and who's coming and where they're coming from. Primarily at this time, Southern and Eastern European immigration is starting to rise. Northern and Western European immigration is starting to decline, but it's still heavily European immigration. You have Asians coming to America, you have small numbers of Latin Americans coming to America, but it's primarily European immigration. Different types of European immigrants, but it's still Europeans that are coming for the most part to the United States. Now, we're going to start with Italians. So specifically, we're going to start with Southern Italians. And there is a distinction between Northern Italians and Southern Italians. They're very different as far as culturally and kind of their contributions to world civilization. So what Italians would say is that these people are coming from south of the Mezzogiorno line, which means they're coming from southern Italy, and that specifically is referring to like the halfway point in Italy. So a good gauge of that, if you're familiar with Italy at all, would be Rome as kind of the Mezzogiorno line. And so these southern Italians, some of the areas that they're coming from, a lot of Sicilians are coming to America, Calabria. Naples is a big kind of exporter of immigrants at the time. And so the reason that they're coming to America, we want to talk about push and pull factors. Why are they coming? So there's two reasons for Italians. Some are push factors and some are pull factors. Push is that they're dealing with terrible, terrible poverty in Italy, and there's been a series of kind of poor harvest and starvation that's kind of pushing these Italians to leave. And sometimes they're going to come in huge communities that almost sometimes with their whole town will migrate or come to America. And so that's a push factor that's pushing Italians out of Italy. A pull factor, though, is they're coming for work. So one big thing that you want to remember about specifically Southern immigration, Southern European immigration, is that they're not all coming to America. They're coming for work. They want to come for work. The Industrial Revolution is underway in a heavy way in the United States. And so they're looking for jobs. And so they're coming specifically to find work in the United States. And so they're not all going to go to the United States. So I could give you a personal example for Italians. Half of my family came at this time in the late 1880s. Half of my family came to America, but the other half of my family actually went to Argentina. And a lot of Italians and Southern Europeans ended up in South America. So if you ever look at some of the names at people who are coming from South American countries, a lot from Brazil and Argentina, a lot of those people are Italian or of European descent because they're leaving and they're going there for work. So America is not the only destination for European immigrants at the time. Now, kind of going along with this, they're going to work, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to stay there for forever. A lot of Italians had in their mind that they're going to come to America, they're going to work, they're going to make some money, and then they're going to go back to Italy. And that was kind of the plan. Or some of them would immigrate multiple times, come for work, go back home, come for work, and go back home. And so that, to a lot of them, was the plan, not to stay in America forever. And that's a big difference, a kind of a mindset difference. Now, most of them ended up staying in the United States. Most of them did not return and go back. But they weren't necessarily leaving the old country behind completely and coming to the new country. They were still had that, a lot wanted to keep their old traditions and keep their old way of life when they came to the United States. So that's important to understand about a lot of these immigrants. So if you compare that to the modern age, a lot of people kind of say, well, they look at Mexican immigration, they say, well, they're coming as far as migrant workers, they just want to work here and then they want to go back home, and they think it's a new thing. It's not a new thing. It's happened before in American history. It's just a poor understanding of our immigration history. The other really big group that's coming to the United States is going to be people coming from Eastern Europe, but it's specifically Eastern European Jews who are immigrating to the United States at this time. And so we have to kind of get into why are European Jews leaving Europe and coming to the United States. So the big things here that they're dealing with in big numbers, more so than the other groups that are coming, for them it's mostly, if not all, push factor for why they're leaving their home countries. So they're dealing with an extreme version of anti-Semitism. Now, anti-Semitism had been around for quite some time in Europe. So what that means, in case you don't know, what anti-Semitism is, it's basically discrimination and hatred towards Jews. It's racism, but directed towards a religious group. Now, it falls into a couple different categories. So there's religious hatred and there's racial hatred for what they're experiencing in Europe. So religious hatred has a long tradition in Europe of kind of taking out their aggression on the one minority group there, which is Jews. And so there's a lot of religious tension between Christians and Jews as far as biblical things that happen and things that happen in religion, revolving the death of Jesus and kind of this hatred that Christians were going to kind of harbor for Jews in their communities. And so Jews for the longest time were segregated from Christians, and they kind of lived in their own communities, especially in Eastern Europe. They lived in their own villages a lot of the time, and they were kind of set apart. But what's something that's new that's starting to happen at the time is something that we'll refer to as racial hatred kind of breaks out. And so they start to kind of see Jews as a separate race in Europe, not just religion, but a separate race of people, a different group of people. And so this is a big part of the scientific racism that's developing around the world at the time. And we've been talking about it, it's happening in America, but it's happening in Europe, and it's happening in other parts of the world as well. So a lot of Jews feel like this is the time we have to get out of Europe. So one movement that's going to develop is something called the Zionist movement, or Zionism. And their big leader is this guy named Theodor Herzl. So we're not going to get into like the specifics of the Zionist movement, but Jews are coming to America, but they're also going to try and found their own homeland in Israel. And so the Zionist movement kind of develops out of this growing hatred and this growing animosity towards Jews on the European continent. They no longer feel safe there, and so they want a homeland that they can kind of prosper in and not worry about the violence that they're experiencing in Europe. Now, some specific stuff that they're dealing with. Something called pogroms. Now, what these were these violent acts that would happen against Jews specifically in Russia, and the state, the czarist regimes would just kind of like turn a blind eye to this and kind of almost allow it to happen. And what would happen here is kind of the Christian Russians will go into these neighborhoods, these ghettos, these Jewish ghettos where the Jews live, and just massacre them. And the police would not stop it, and they happen. Like, these are just outbreaks of violence against Jews. And this is one of the big reasons why Jews are going to kind of start to migrate and start to leave and get out of Europe. It seems like they've always dealt with discrimination, but the violence is just kind of escalating, and they want to get out. Kind of on the flip side here, you're going to have Chinese immigration to the United States. Now, Chinese immigration is similar in some ways and different in other ways. They're coming mostly for work, and again, the Chinese, just like the Italians, in a lot of sense, have a belief that they're going to go back home, that they're not going to stay here forever. So the type of immigrants that are coming that are Chinese is very one-sided. They end up with a very male-dominated society as far as the Chinatowns that develop. Specifically in San Francisco has a big community, but you also have them in New York City, obviously, like around Canal Street. Now, some of these places you're going to have like 60, 70, almost 80% men in these communities because they're coming primarily for work, and if they were going to have their family, they're going to send for them later. And so it's heavily male-dominated communities. And they're coming in the beginning to work on the railroads, for the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific Railroads. And then later they're also coming for employment opportunities. They did a lot of mining out west and a lot of very hard labor jobs. Now, what really starts to happen at this time is there's a boom of nativism. And we're going to call this a nativist revival because we experienced the first wave of nativism, which meant kind of this rejection of immigrants, rejection of foreigners by the quote-unquote, real Americans here in America at the time. But nativism is going to kind of take on a different spin here in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It's really going to kind of center more on what's called scientific racism. And so they're going to look at these new immigrant groups, specifically the Italians, the Jews from Eastern Europe, and the Chinese. And they're going to look at them kind of through this context of social Darwinism and scientific racism. And they're going to kind of look at them and say, well, not only are they different from us culturally and we don't like their religion, but they're inferior to us. Their racial characteristics, they come from an inferior stock. Northern and Western Europeans are, basically better genetically than these other immigrant groups. And so this is going to be kind of a big push as far as the nativist movement is that they're polluting the American stock and they're bringing down Americans because of their racial characteristics. And you're going to see the same type of logic out there with Hitler when he rises to power in Nazi Germany. He uses the same type of scientific racism to justify his positions and segregating the Jews and the Nuremberg laws. And so this is kind of the beginning of that type of thought. What also goes along with this is something called eugenics, which we're going to get into later, but is kind of basically killing off the people who are of inferior racial stock. Now, what these new Europeans are going to kind of see, what you see here in these political cartoons, this is from the Irish, but what they see with the Europeans that are coming here, what they notice is that although they're discriminated against, the real divide in America is black and white. And all they feel like they have to do to prove that they're Americans is to prove their whiteness. So something that I want you guys to know, a phrase that I want you to know is called graduating to whiteness. And what these new European groups tried to do is try and prove their whiteness, and we would kind of almost call like prove your Americanness to kind of fit in and kind of separate themselves out and say, no, try and lump together. We're more like you. We're more like the Europeans than we are like the Africans that are here. Now, the nativists, the white Americans, are going to kind of do the complete opposite. They're going to say, that's not true at all. You are much more like, the blacks and the newly freed men than you are like us. And so it's kind of this argument of who's white in America. Because they're going to say, Italians are definitely not white. Jews are definitely not white. They don't fit into the category